Good morning, and welcome to the College of Coastal Georgia. We are delighted to be the host location for this event today. It's one of those days where I look at the room and I think about all these seats that are full, and you wish that you had more. You wish you had more space. I know we may have some people, additional people joining us to take a few of these open seats, but it's great that we have the opportunity today to video this discussion so that it can be shared with others. But I think about the really perfect nature of this location today, and I hope you'll agree with me that college campuses are places where ideas are born, where movements are started, where we hope that light bulbs are going off for our students. So it seems like a very fitting place to hold an event like this one. I was talking to Paul White as we were preparing for this event, and we were talking about how the bottom line that I think brought us all here today is that we are vulnerable. Well, we are vulnerable because there has been a trend that has been going on for 30 years. It's expected to go on for 30 years or more. And so it's time. It's time for us to talk, and it's time for us to plan. So with a slate of impressive presenters and a room full of people who care, let's ignite that conversation. Thank you for being here today. I know we're starting a few minutes early because we all got here and are eager to start this work. So we're going to go ahead and get started. But thank you so much for being here on our campus. I hope you'll come back and that this will be a very fruitful conversation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. As she mentioned, my name is Paul White. I have the honor of being the President and CEO of the Coastal Georgia Foundation. I wanted to thank each of you for getting out here on this cold morning today to engage with us to start this broad, ongoing discussion about a matter that will have a very, very real impact on all of us in Glynn County, all of us who live, work, play, and invest in this community. Before I start, though, I think it's important to discuss or mention what this discussion is to this morning and what it's not. What it is not is a discussion about carbon sequestration and global warming. What it is, as Dr. Johnson just mentioned, is a recognition that we are experiencing or have experienced 30 years of a rather frightening trend when you look at sea level risings. Regardless of what is causing those rises, we have, in the best case scenario, at least another 30 years of that trend. We would be foolish as a community not to start this very meaningful discussion about how we are going to start planning for the reality that we're going to be facing in the future. Before we get started, though, I think I need to give some special thanks to a couple of individuals, if you will allow me to, who made this morning possible. From the College of Coastal Georgia, Dr. Michelle Johnson, the college's new and very, very impressive president, who I enjoyed working with on this, as well as Dr. Tate Holbrook, Associate Professor of Biology. Without the support of both of you, we would all be having a very different morning today. Also from the college, I'd like to thank Colleen Chasteen for your remarkable AV and audio assistance. Her technical skills, again, have made this a much better experience today and with much better information. Couldn't have done it without her. Woody Woodside from the Brunswick-Golden Isles Chamber of Commerce, and Scott McQuaid from the Convention and Visitors Bureau, who have been very supportive and collaborative partners on this effort. This event would not have been possible without the buy-in, vision, and hard work of my staff at the Coastal Georgia Foundation. Ellen Post, my Director of Grants Operations, and Anna Hall, my Director of Marketing, thank you very much. I couldn't have done this without you. And then special thanks to one of our Coastal Georgia Foundation's most inspiring fund holders, Frances Wennick. This event was Frances's idea, and she has been an excellent, visionary, and often challenging partner in our efforts to make this successful. So Frances, thank you. My hat's off to you. I would like to now call on Rabbi Rachel Bregman with Temple Beth Tefillah in Brunswick for this morning's invocation. Rabbi?
Good morning, everyone. The Jewish sages tell a story that when King David was going to dig the foundations for the temple in Jerusalem, he placed it, according to ancient lore, on the Even Shtiyah, or the foundational stone of the entire world. And when he did this, he disturbed it and poured forth from the hole that he left all of the waters from the Tehom, from the depths. These are the primordial waters from which all of the earth was created. They threatened to destroy the world in that moment. Only by casting a tiny little potsherd with God's name written on it into that hole was King David able to quiet the waters and stop them from bursting forth. Now, this is a story about how human hubris almost destroyed everything. It's also a story of human ingenuity and how it can be a brilliant, creative, clever force for good. If we only plumb the depths using power without the counterbalance of wisdom and crack open unknown and unconscious forces of great power, all will be lost. But if we use that same power and plumb our own depths, our own deeply rooted forces, we can find solutions to complex problems. We can bring healing by reconnecting the sacred with the earth, which is why we're all here today. To set a sacred intention of repairing the damage done through our brilliance and sometimes our arrogance. So we take a moment now as we begin this day to take a deep breath. Go ahead, take a deep breath. Let's all be here in this room, about to enact an extraordinary thing of coming together. Let us bring our attention fully to this place and to the task at hand. Whether we pray to a God or we pray to the four corners of the earth, or we do not pray at all, we all know the pull and the power of our connection to place, to the land, to this coastline, this ocean, and our Mother Earth. Let us grow together the bonds amongst all of the inhabitants of this place. Let us grow the power between us. Let us work together to shift the tides that rise and calm the seas within us and beyond, in services of saving a fractured earth and a broken world. Have a good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Amazing. Before I introduce today's speakers, I'd like to take care of a few points of business, if I may. When you came in this morning, I think you were, a little card was thrust upon you. I encourage you, as you listen to these presentations, if you have any questions, please jot those down legibly on that card and pass them to the aisles. We'll be coming around intermittently this morning to pick those up. If we do pick them up, we'll make sure another one is sent back to you in case you have other questions. People on the end of the aisles, thank you for your cooperation and service. As you know, the program is going to last about 2 hours and 15 minutes. Because of the density of the information and the number of presenters, we did not schedule any breaks. Unfortunately, this was required, and so in the time allotted, we'll have to use every bit of time we have. Obviously, that can create certain challenges. Just to let you know, there are restrooms. If you go out, take a right and another right, you'll find them. Okay, now for this morning's speakers. Due to the time limitations, again, I will only give a very brief introduction for each speaker. You will notice on the information that was handed out to you this morning a little bit more in-depth information for each of them. Dr. Russell Clark, PhD, Director of Mobile Technology and IoT Programs at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Russ is a part-time resident of Richmond Hill, Georgia, and has been motivated to work on sea level monitoring by firsthand experiences with the increasing impact of rising waters in coastal communities. With him from Georgia Tech is Dr. Kim Cobb, PhD, Professor and Director, Global Change Programs. Kim's research uses coral and cave stalagmites to probe the mechanisms of past, present, and future climate changes. Charles Izell, Principal and Regional Director, Thomas & Hutton. As a licensed professional engineer, Charles has extensive experience in site assessment, rezoning, preliminary engineering, permit applications, engineer design, contract documents and specifications, construction administration for water, wastewater, stormwater, drainage, and roads for commercial, residential, municipal, and industrial projects. A special thank you to Mr. Izell for coming. Due to the government closing, we lost one of our speakers from the Park Service, and he stepped in at the last minute, and we are very fortunate to get him, and he fits this program perfectly. Jill Gamble, Public Service Faculty and Coastal Resilience Specialist, Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant at the University of Georgia. Jill is co-author of Georgia's first and second municipal sea level rise plans, which were unanimously adopted by the city councils of Tybee Island in 2016 and St. Mary's in 2017. And she has earned national recognition for her work with communities throughout the Southeast in preparing, responding, and adapting to sea level rise and storm surge. Jimmy Junkin, Executive Director, Brunswick-Golden County Joint Water and Sewer Commission. Jimmy has worked in various process, environmental, water, wastewater treatment, and management positions, including time at Dow Chemical, Chemical Waste Management, and most recently as the Director of the Tuscaloosa Water and Sewer Department before joining us in Glynn County. Jennifer Klein, Coastal Hazard Specialist, Coastal Resource Division of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. Jennifer is leading the state and coastal Georgia in disaster recovery and redevelopment planning, making Georgia the first state to have a completely resilient coast based on FEMA's National Disaster Recovery Framework by the year 2020. And Mason Waters, Regional President, United Community Bank. Mason is a Glynn County native and has nearly 20 years of experience in the financial services industry, and since 2014 has served as president of United Community Bank in Brunswick, overseeing all bank activities in the region. I'm now going to turn the podium over to Dr. Cobb and Dr. Clark. Thank you.
Let's see here. Do I just?
Yes.
Oh, great, it's there. Yay, okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and I want to acknowledge Russ Clark here, who is a co-director of this program. In the interest of time, I'm going to stand here, and he's going to play a supporting role by waving our censer in the air. So I'm here today to talk about a new program that's about 6 months old or so, and it's run under the auspices of the Georgia Smart Communities Challenge, which is run out of Georgia Tech and funded by a consortium of public and private funding. It's a year-long project. The reason why I think we're so successful and having so much fun serving the community in Chatham County is because we have the close partnership of the Chatham County Emergency Management Agency, as well as the City of Savannah through the Mayor's Office and the Office of Sustainability. So I'm here today to talk about this framework, which I think is very promising as a union between technical experts and community stakeholders in serving the needs of communities. So not getting out of front, but co-development of this solution. And obviously, Glynn County faces the same challenge that Chatham County does, which is that we have the compound threat of rising sea levels caused by climate change, as well as you've had some near brushes with hurricanes in the recent past. And this is going to be a compound threat going forward, as science tells us that these events may be strengthening in the future. So the sea level rise curve has already been alluded to. This is the record of sea level going back to 1993 that we have available from satellites. It's our best record. I'm fond of calling this the most boring record in climate change. So a lot of those temperature records go up and down. This one marches forward steadily, ominously for those communities on the coast. If you propagate this forward over the next 100 years, well, in this case I have 50 years, you're getting to 3 to 6 inches depending on the rates of sea level rise. We might call this a low estimate because it's just projecting these rates. If we want to look at more extreme scenarios, which are some of those depicted here, this is a plot from the National Climate Assessment tracking the gauge at Fort Pulaski over the last, 50 years or so down in the black data, showing the incidence of flooding becoming more frequent at that tide gauge and projecting forward using our best available science and understanding. Those extreme scenarios reflect uncertainties about the path of emissions that we'll have going forward, as well as the response of ice sheets and ocean heat to climate change itself. So compound uncertainties could lead to extreme scenarios on the very, very upper end of the distribution. I have to stress these are in the top 95% bracket, so only less than a 5% chance of coming to bear, but those are up to 51 inches of global sea level rise by 2100. Why these really high rates? Why are scientists starting to inch up on these distributions? Well, we have two things going on. We've seen in the recent week 2 articles come out in the New York Times helping us understand that these ice sheets are not going to melt any slower going forward. If anything, there's evidence to suggest that they're going to melt faster going forward. Right now, they contribute 50% of global sea level rise is caused by the melting of land ice. The other 50% of global sea level rise is caused by ocean warming, the expansion of the ocean as it takes in heat. And that, unfortunately, is also accelerating with recent studies suggesting it's much faster than even the models and scientists thought a mere 2 or 3 years ago. And here on the coast, we also have the phenomenon that blue sky flooding is becoming more and more frequent. This is just illustrating some of the consequences of the steady march may be. And this is a photo taken by my colleague here, Russ, and his neighborhood down on the coast on a blue sky day, coastal flooding. And so the challenge to these communities is multiple layers of challenges. And as a project, we have our aim on applications involving emergency response. Before a flooding emergency, you want to think about flood risk. You want to think about understanding how wind direction and rainfall runoff during extreme precipitation impacts the vulnerability of coastal communities. That's not an easy question because that's a complex bag. We can't rely on past information to help inform that. We have to understand the full spectrum of future risk during extreme events like hurricanes. During the event, you have a need for real-time information to help you understand what portions of your critical infrastructure are at risk and how can you help prevent the loss of property and loss of life that might occur during these extreme events with this real-time information. After the event, you have the mop-up period, which can close communities and shut them down for, as we saw, weeks at a time as they slowly assess what portions of that critical infrastructure are ready for full operation and can be open for business. And so there are issues there. So the Sea Level Sensor Project launched in August officially. I encourage you to go to our website. You can watch a video and understand a bit better the lay of the land. But on the Georgia Tech side, we have a deep bench of climate scientists like myself, civil engineers like David Frost, coastal ocean modelers like Manu DiLorenzo, computer science experts like Russ Clark, as well as educational specialists to help us serve the local communities in the schools and in the classrooms. SEMA, Randall Matthews is a lead partner there, and he's been supported by his boss, Dennis Jones, as well as civil engineers and other folks like David Anderson, City of Savannah, Nick Deffley. The director of the City of Savannah is the lead for that portion of the project, supported by a cast of important people helping us from the city perspective. So again, we all sit around every few months and we talk about where we're going and what motivates us and how we can serve this community better. So the project goals fall into these broad categories. We have emergency planning and response through the generation of portals that can display and deliver real-time data to the community, to emergency planners and responders. And we have some toolkits that are under development. We have our aim on short and long-term assessment of flood risk for Chatham County. And so that really goes to speak to the full panoply of challenges that this community faces with those extreme events compounded by sea level rise, understanding the full breadth of uncertainty in the mix. We also are focused on delivering those educational tools as well as building awareness and communication through events much like this, which I'm honored to present at. So I'm going to talk about only two aspects today because we really, in the interest of time, can't go through the whole project. But I'm going to talk to you about the sensor network itself, which is the core backbone of our project. It is the guts of our effort, as well as show you the challenges and opportunities of developing an integrated coastal ocean model for Chatham County that goes from the open ocean all the way to Interstate 95 and covers all of that critical infrastructure. So first of all, the sensors. Russ will show you this sensor package here in real life, and if you want, we can open it up and show you the guts. I've opened it up in these photos here on the bottom right so that you can see what's involved. There's an antenna. There's a ultrasonic sea level sensor. This gets mounted on a bridge, as you can see in the bottom center photo, and it pings down to the ocean surface and pings back, and that tells us the distance from that installed sensor. All of these are surveyed, and so that we know where they are. They're accurate to several millimeters. They are very powerful. They communicate with a gateway device that can serve hundreds of these sensors each. And these gateway devices are, of course, plugged onto the internet. And so they can deliver this data to a data repository, and we can visualize it here. I'm showing the current map of the sensors here. Russ has installed every single one of these sensors and gateways. So he spends a lot of time down here. We're building out to a goal of about 100 sensors over the next year or so. We finally have moved from development to production mode of these sensors, so we're very excited to move that forward. Right now, we only have sea level and air temperature incorporated sensors, but we hope to move on quickly to exploring how we can capture seawater properties with underwater sensors, as well as implementations of air quality sensors on this backbone of gateways that we already have installed, and inland flooding, which is a huge issue during extreme precipitation events for these communities as well. So stay tuned. On the modeling side, oops, no, there we go, hold on. On the modeling side, this is a very complex terrain to model. We need the best tools in the world, and this is evidenced by the fact that we have an ongoing partnership with the University of Bologna, who have developed some of the highest resolution coastal ocean modeling tools in the world. And Georgia Tech scientists led by Manu Di Lorenzo are developing a first-in-class integrated ocean model that can go from the open ocean to Interstate 95, addressing the ocean, the land, and the atmosphere, and critical infrastructure all in one go. So we'll need a lot of supercomputers for that, but we have those at Georgia Tech. So that's very exciting. Here's an example of that grid that we can show you early on. It's running right now. It goes from 1 meter to 10 meters. It captures all of those little inlets and tributaries. We can blow wind over it. We can do tides with it. We can put precipitation down on this grid, and we can watch the ocean levels fall and rise. So this is just an example of the modeling, but I wanted to speak to the educational partnerships as well that we have. This is a photo of us visiting Jenkins High School. We're very keen to enable, through the technology that we have developed, the real full participation of as many students as possible in this project. And so this is an engineering school, and so they're going to be helping us to assemble these sensors in their classroom. And Oglethorpe Middle School, we have a small grant to develop sea level curriculum for 6th grade, and I know we'll be working closely with a lot of entities that have already been working on this for the coast, but we're excited to contribute as we can. And just briefly, looking ahead, we have an open invitation to our next sea level sensor workshop, which is next week, 9 to 10:30 a.m. Georgia Coastal Center. You're welcome to come. We go into a deeper dive on this project. We'll have a presentation from our modeling lead. We'll have a presentation from the sea level sensor placement team lead. If you want to sign up for communications, please go to our website and sign up for the newsletter, and we'll send you information about upcoming events and status of this project. Also, if you're interested in getting involved today, please make yourself known to Russ and I. Drop us an email. We are really eager to expand the network of partnerships around this project, to understand better how to serve this community. And every meeting we have tons of resources brought into the project to help inform our work. And that's why it's been so successful, and that's why Russ and I are truly so excited to be leading this project. So leading with this passing thought that drives us, how can we best serve your community? Thank you very much.
See if I can. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jill Gamble. I'm the Coastal Resilience Specialist for University of Georgia Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant. We are part of the NOAA Sea Grant Network, which is comprised of 33 programs located in every coastal and Great Lakes state, as well as several U.S. territories. Sea Grant provides research, education, and outreach on a myriad of coastal issues, from fisheries to water quality to marine debris and much more. UGA Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant has offices throughout the state of Georgia, including a facility right here in Brunswick. So please come visit us. I was asked to speak today because, as Paul mentioned, I'm co-author of the first sea level rise plan implemented in the state of Georgia, which was unanimously adopted by Tybee Island City Council in April 2016. So this is still a very new process, thinking about sea level rise along the Georgia coast. Although Jennifer will be talking about efforts that have been going back for a little while, trying to move things forward. I'm also lead author of the state's second flood resiliency plan, which was adopted unanimously by St. Mary's City Council in May 2017. So Glynn County sits between two long-term NOAA tide gauges. These are gauges that measure the water level every 6 minutes. One at Fort Pulaski National Monument in Savannah, Georgia, and one at Fernandina Beach on Amelia Island, Florida. Even though we are physically closer to Fernandina Beach here, the tidal range and processes for this area are actually more relevant to the Fort Pulaski tide gauge. It has measured 10 inches of sea level rise since 1935, when it was first installed. This has led to sharp increases in flooding along the Georgia coast. This also means that when a tropical storm or hurricane threatens Glynn County, storm surge launches from a higher point than in the past, which results in events like this. This is a super moon lunar eclipse in Brunswick in September 2015. Hurricane Matthew in October 2016. Even though the hurricane did not pass at high tide along the Georgia coast, it still produced water levels 1.5 feet higher than any on record for the Savannah area. And again, that goes back to 1935. And then Hurricane Irma in September 2017. I'm sure many of you have seen this photo before. Looking to the future, NOAA predicts between 1.4 to 10.5 feet of sea level rise in Glynn County by 2100. As you all know, this is a huge range to plan for. So let me unpack those numbers a little bit. As scientific modeling improves and more is known about the Earth's changing climate, agencies like NOAA can better predict the localized impacts of sea level rise. Scientists are now able to downscale the global projections to include regional dynamics, factoring in things like sedimentation, groundwater or fossil fuel withdrawal, post-glacial rebound, changes in ocean circulation patterns, and other factors. As a result of these regional processes, predictions of regional sea level rise for Glynn County are 28% higher than the global average for 2100. So let me say that again, because if you remember one thing from my talk, this is a pretty important one. The regional sea level rise projections for Glynn County are 28% higher than the global averages for 2100. It is very important to note, however, that the high and extreme scenario in this chart have very low probabilities of occurring, less than 1% chance. However, if you are considering things that have a low risk tolerance, such as a military base or a wastewater treatment plant, you might want to include these worst case scenarios. The lower scenarios have a much higher probability of occurring. Even if we were to drastically reduce emissions in the atmosphere, the low scenario would still have a 94% chance of occurring. NOAA has taken this data to estimate the number of days where we would experience flooding at high tide in Glynn County, projecting that to be 76 to 365 days per year by 2100. Even under an intermediate scenario of sea level rise, there could be 363 days per year of flooding at high tide by 2100, or literally every day of the year. DNR has run simulations to help visualize how our ecosystems and marshes might respond to these different sea level rise scenarios, and my colleague Jennifer Klein will be talking more about those efforts momentarily. While sea level rise is a slow creeping process occurring over time, there will be episodic events like king tides and hurricanes that will punctuate this gradual progression. These events are expected to become more frequent and severe over time, particularly when compounded by population growth and heavier rainfall. So even though I've talked about 2100, this is a problem that exists now, next year, and every year after. So let's talk about what this means financially. Collectively in Glynn County, FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program offers coverage for over $4 billion in properties and assets. However, the maps that FEMA uses to determine who is in the floodplain and who might be mandated to maintain flood insurance are based on historic factors. We've just talked about how the future is not going to look like business as usual here in Brunswick. We can expect that flood insurance rates and the number of people requiring coverage are going to increase in the future. Luckily, Brunswick, Glynn County, and Jekyll Island are all actively participating in FEMA's community rating system. This is a voluntary incentive program that rewards local governments for improved floodplain management and flood safety outreach. Communities earn points for these actions, which translates into flood insurance discounts for property owners. Brunswick, Jekyll Island, and Glynn County are currently saving $1.25 million in premium discounts through CRS. However, there's room to grow. In CRS, the lower the rating, the greater the discount. So Jekyll Island, for example, currently sits at a solid 5 rating, earning a 20% discount in flood insurance premiums. A 5 is currently the lowest any community in Georgia has achieved so far. Brunswick is at a 9, earning 5% discount, while Glynn County has a 7 rating, earning 15% discount. Given the amount of property that Glynn County has covered by flood insurance, there's a great opportunity to further increase these savings through floodplain management and outreach actions. Many communities in Georgia have begun proactively addressing their vulnerability to sea level rise, so Glynn County has some great examples from neighboring communities to draw inspiration from. The cities of Tybee Island and St. Mary's have adopted specific plans to prepare for flooding from sea level rise. These communities have been nationally recognized for their leadership in proactively investigating their risk and weighing adaptation options. Tybee's plan includes things like raising Highway 80, retrofitting their stormwater system, elevating well houses, beach renourishment, and they even looked at building a seawall around the southwest corner of the island. Now, I'm sure all of you have been to Tybee, one of our favorite places, right, on the coast. US Highway 80 is the only road on and off Tybee. Our vulnerability assessment indicated that if it is not elevated, it will flood between 50 to 1,250 hours per year by 2060, depending on which rate of sea level rise unfolds. Tybee was also concerned about flooding that was occurring in the southwest corner of the island. However, our analysis revealed that the water was not coming up over the lip of the island, but rather flowing backwards through its stormwater system. Tybee addressed this by installing a tide gate to prevent the backflow of water. During Hurricane Matthew, storm surge traveled through beach access points on Tybee, flooding streets and homes behind these entryways. Tybee has done a great job of accessing funds to build a continuous dune system with elevated beach access over the dunes to prevent the water and storm surge from coming through. And then finally, after Hurricane Irma, Tybee applied to elevate 60-plus homes on the island. And the last I heard, they are waiting on approval from FEMA. As a result of all these actions, Tybee currently has a 5 rating in the community rating system. In St. Mary's, we looked at critical infrastructure at risk from sea level rise, including what roads and points in their stormwater system might be vulnerable. Since adopting the plan, St. Mary's has received a grant for urban stormwater retrofits. They are creating a downtown marsh retention and detention area. They're installing similar backflow preventers as Tybee. And they were until recently looking at setting up a stormwater utility fund. But I understand Brunswick now has beaten them out on that. You all just adopted that. Savannah and Chatham County are developing sea level rise plans themselves now as part of FEMA's community rating system. They are trying to become the first communities in Georgia to drop down to a 4 rating, which would entail a whopping 30% discount on flood insurance. They also have a grant creating 3 urban tree nurseries and establishing a landscape management workforce development program. They're exploring how green infrastructure on underutilized FEMA lots can help mitigate flooding, particularly in lower income neighborhoods. And of course, Kim just told you about their sea level sensor project. Camden County currently has a grant to develop online tools to aid planning for sea level rise. The Rise Ready education and outreach program is being led by the Nature Conservancy, working to raise awareness of flood risk and assist local governments in smart growth practices. Camden has also partnered with St. Mary's to create the state's first PPI, which earned them points in the community rating system, leading again to flood insurance discounts. So you can see many communities are using CRS, or the community rating system, to not only improve safety, but also for economic benefit. The UGA campus on Skidaway Island created a working group to tackle their flood issues, bringing together engineers, planners, educators, and even lawyers to develop strategies to reduce flood damage. I just spoke to Clark Alexander on Friday, who's the director of the Skidaway Institute of Oceanography, and he asked me to share that they would like to make the UGA campus a testing grounds for potential solutions, a place to monitor and gather data to see if the proposed method is effective. So please reach out to him or me if you have an idea in mind that you'd like to demo. And just this weekend, the Savannah Morning News reported that Skidaway Island will likely vote in March to become incorporated. Proponents argue that this would give them a more localized control of marine debris and storm response, as well as allow them to apply directly for FEMA funding. Glynn County can also learn from some of the challenges that other communities have faced. This is a NOAA sea level rise viewer, which is still available online despite the government shutdown, so check it out. You can explore the different scenarios and see what they might look like for this area. I'm zoomed in right now on Glynn County. Sea level rise is a long-term problem. It's going to require a sustained commitment to reduce its impacts. It can be difficult to stay the course when other pressing short-term priorities keep coming up. Or you have changes in leadership, which can require re-educating decision makers all over again. So have a plan for how you're going to keep this conversation going. Another issue that communities have run up against is that many of the problems they are encountering entail coordination and even reliance on other agencies. They don't have jurisdictional purview to fix the problem. This is just an example of the different entities involved in the issues we investigated on Tybee Island. Some of the lowest hanging fruit may be to talk about local infrastructure, like wastewater treatment, stormwater systems, roads, and city water supply. You can put these on a map, adding layers for where you expect the water to go and how high it will be. But I encourage you not to ignore the cultural and socioeconomic risks that are associated with sea level rise. In April 2018, FEMA published an affordability study indicating that Americans with the lowest median incomes live in the highest flood hazard areas. Thus, those most burdened with the rising cost of flood insurance may have the least ability to afford it. FEMA is actively investigating how to equitably and sustainably redesign their flood insurance pricing structure. So think about who is not at the table as you move forward in making Glynn County more resilient. Some members of your community will bear a disproportionate brunt or burden to the impacts of sea level rise. Make sure you are bringing them along as you work to ensure that Brunswick and the Golden Isles thrive for many years to come. And finally, please let me know how I can assist and us at UGA as you all work together to make your community more resilient. Thank you so much.
Mine's not on here.
It's not? Where's our IT support? We're missing a presentation.
I can go grab it real quick.
Is any of this? Here she comes.
Well, good morning. I just really wanted to kind of give you all a perspective of where the state, the Department of Natural Resources, where our objectives and kind of goals are in planning for sea level rise, some areas where we are working on it at the state level. Also, regionally, when I say regionally, I mean the coastal Georgia and how we are addressing it at a regional perspective. And then some things that Glynn County and the City of Brunswick and Jekyll Island have been doing to incorporate sea level rise into their work as we have been working with them on that. Oops. So some of our objectives are just providing technical assistance to our local governments to kind of help them see where we're working at it at a state level and where some of the feds are working at it. So we act as that liaison. We also promote the research, research to management. We fund a lot of projects. Some of the community rating system projects that Jill was just talking about, our program has been funding those. So if there are projects that the county or the city are interested in just coming to us, and we can help foster that. And that is one of our goals, to be able to do that. So we're actually using real research in making some of those management decisions. Into state planning, we have incorporated some sea level rise planning into the State Wildlife Action Plan that is updated on a routine basis. We also have been incorporating it at the federal level into the National Fish, Wildlife, and Plant Climate Adaptation Strategy. And then recently, our office has been working with the Georgia Emergency Management Agency on their update of the State Hazard Mitigation Plan. There is an entire coastal hazard section, and we have been writing in sea level rise into that portion, along with some of the tools to which we ran some models looking at storm surge with sea level rise on top of that. And so FEMA has provided a little bit of comment back on that, and that will be adopted and signed by Governor Hill in April. And just for reference, this picture here to your right is a sea level rise model. This is Highway 17. If you look at the very bottom corner where that white is, I don't know if this is a pointer or not, that is the middle school, Glynn Middle School. And so, you know, talking a little bit about the sea level rise, even today, as you see the entrance road to that middle school is already inundated routinely by high tide flooding, so it's already salt water by the road, and so you will already have cars driving through that salt water to get to the school. So that's just a good example. That's out to the year 2100, and so you know you're experiencing it now, and this is where it will even take you, down the road. One method that we have taken is we are doing disaster recovery and redevelopment plans. This is based on FEMA's National Disaster Recovery Framework. And so a lot of people, when they think of disasters, you think of the response while the sirens are on, the lights are on, and, getting back immediately. Well, we're taking it a step further, and we're looking at long-term recovery. 10 years, 50 years, even 100 years down the road, it's recovery and redevelopment. So if you have the opportunity to redevelop your community after a major disaster, looking at some of the sea level rise maps and knowing what you know now, and you have a clean slate, you might want to take another step at how you would want to rebuild your community to make it more resilient. And so we have completed plans for Chatham County, for Brantley County, Charlton, and Camden. And Camden's is to be adopted today as we speak. And then and Glynn County as well has completed a plan. And so we also have secured funding to complete the rest of the counties, the 11 coastal counties, and that should be completed by the year 2020. And doing this, we are encouraging all of the communities, or requiring them to at least look at sea level rise when planning for redevelopment. So when we did the Jekyll Island, Glynn County, and City of Brunswick plan, we did it as a joint plan. Obviously, disasters know no municipal or jurisdiction boundary, so it was really important that we do this together. We also had a piece of, actually it was, back up for a second, it was really interesting because we started this in August, and immediately following the kickoff meeting, we had Hurricane Matthew. And I think Jay's back there somewhere, Jay Wiggins back there somewhere. He was, feet first into this because it really provided an opportunity for this county that previous counties had not had, was an experience in having a disaster. We've been very fortunate up until the last couple of years to not really have a whole lot of experience on how to handle it. So this gave us that opportunity in doing Glynn County's plan. We also had a little bit of funds left over from doing this project, and we reached out to the Joint Water and Sewer Commission, and we did a climate resilience adaptation planning report for them, and I'll get to that a little bit more. Part of the plan for Glynn County and the municipalities is to look at the sea level rise maps. So we had the maps for all of the jurisdictions locally, and we used the intermediate number for sea level rise rates that Jill was talking about. And so you can see these are just people kind of gone through from the county, city, and Jekyll, and kind of ground truth the maps. Let us know if you feel like those maps are off, or if you have seen, you know, flooding in other places that aren't reflected on the maps. And so we went through this process, actually 2 different times with staff. So for Glynn County, this is the Glynn County intermediate map. Obviously, Glynn County is pretty big, so it's a little bit hard to see on. We also have the city of Brunswick's sea level rise rates, the intermediate maps. The red is the year 2100, and the yellow is 2050. And Jekyll and St. Simon's. I think it's important to note that these numbers are based on it's called a SLAM model. And so it demonstrates actual land use shifts. And so you know if it's going from, say, open water, or if it's going to mudflat to open water, or if you're losing actual mainland, rather than just flooding based on elevation. This is, really giving you a feel for how your land use will change. So Glynn County adopted their plan in August of 2017, and the city of Brunswick adopted their plan in October, this previous October of 2018. In their plans, they have a set of recommendations for actions, whether it's do it now, or you may have to wait to do it till after the storm, and then what's the priority for getting those done. And so just some examples of what's actually in the document. Under this one, it says elevate critical infrastructure and surrounding access roads to minimize the impacts of flooding and to sea level rise. And that is a pre-disaster action. It's a long-term goal, and it is a high priority. And this was determined by staff, like I said, and whoever wanted to kind of provide input to it, and then adopted by the county. Just really quickly, these other two, I don't even know if I can read them. Nope. And then going to the Water and Sewer Commission's plan as well. This really used a tool to look at all of their critical infrastructure and look at it for an assessment, a vulnerability assessment to flooding. That was storm surge flooding, sea level rise, high tide flooding, and or just routine rainfall events. It also gave them some of the actions that they could take to make it less vulnerable. And these weren't extreme, actions. They're very reasonable actions that could be done. It put it into a cost category and the resiliency effectiveness. And so some of them were for the water treatment facilities, some were for the different lift stations, whether it was to install green infrastructure, when around beyond the boundaries that would help to kind of offset some of that. And so those were also delivered to the Water and Sewer Commission Board. I believe it was in 2016 or 17. Some other past projects, sea level rise projects, are not new to Glynn County. We have funded the University of Georgia River Basin Center to do a project in 2009. It was a sea level rise planning and visualization in coastal Georgia project. Part of this project was also done to pick a potentially developable area. In this one, they picked Hermitage Island, and they did a build-out scenario with sea level rise overlay, so that's what this map is. And then the results from this project were delivered to the Glynn County Commission work session in 2009. In 2012, at the request of the City of Brunswick, we gave a presentation to the City Commission and handed over a set of these sea level rise maps to the city as well. And then in 2012, we funded the University of Georgia to conduct an assessment and application of the Social Vulnerability Index for coastal hazards planning, and that included sea level rise for all of Glynn County, and that was completed for this area as well. So currently, especially after the hurricanes and the issues that arose in this county, we funded Glynn County to do a shoreline protection and implementation plan. That project is underway in year one. The first year, they are doing a shoreline assessment and a resiliency plan of the shoreline. And so it does also involve the city and the Back Barrier Islands and the Jekyll Island Authority as part of that project as well. Year two will start October of this year, 2019. And year two will then take it and do a sea level rise response and implementation plan. So stay tuned for results from that. And then just some of the challenges that we have seen working with local governments and doing these coastal hazards planning is, there are always going to be skeptics. And so do you stop doing what you're doing and moving forward? And I say no. I mean, you continue to move on from that because you know that will never change. There is political turnover. It's very difficult, with letting a county or a city know about a project that is there in their community, but then, somebody else is reelected. And so it's hard to keep that momentum and that education going. You need a community champion, someone to drive it, keep it going and to really want to see it to move forward. And I think that with the city of Tybee Island, they definitely had a really good community champion, and the same with the city of St. Mary's. So I think that that's very important. It may be one of you in here today. Funding is not always easy. I think that we are fortunate here in coastal Georgia to have a lot of funding opportunities, and so I think just asking and reaching out to any of the panelists here today, and I think there are a lot of resources where you can see a lot of this come to fruition. It's not legally required. That's always going to be a challenge, and it's my challenge to you that we provide you the guidance on how to do it. You just have to be the champion to be able to go ahead and make it go forward to fruition. And then change. Nobody likes change. It's difficult. It's a change in a change in habit, and how you do things, how you think about things. It's a change in how you do planning, how you do zoning, how you do building. It's just a change. And to that, I challenge everyone in here to think about how there are needs and gaps, and how you might be able to fill some of those needs and gaps. I mean, our panelists are a small part of your community and helping it work here, but there is a bigger part to this community, and I think that it will take everyone to see that this actually happens. Our next steps, back in 2016, we offered the first climate change conference here. It was held on Jekyll Island, and I'm happy to say that we have funding to offer another one in 2020. There is also a climate change conference that will be held in 2019 up in the Atlanta area, and so we're going to be going back and forth between Coast and Atlanta. So if it's too far to go to Atlanta, you don't want to get messed up in all that traffic, stay tuned. We're going to have another one here in 2020.
Good morning. I'm Jimmy Junkin from the Joint Water and Sewer Commission. I'm going to be a little more pragmatic, I'm afraid, and point out some of the obstacles that we have to face as we implement the very well worked out plan. Sorry. And it's front back. Okay. Thank you. Well, this morning, as I was asked to come in and do this, I guess my segment of the overall operation or the program, I had to look at the impact issues that we face as a Joint Water and Sewer Commission in anticipating the rise in sea level. And certainly there's some short-term and long-term impacts. I know that both Jennifer and Jill pointed out some of the in-between things that we have to deal with, which even those have great impacts on a utility like ours. As I looked at it, I was looking at the timing and speed of sea level rise. Again, getting back to the issues that were brought up earlier, you know, how fast do we get, I mean, how much time do we have to prepare for these things? What is our ability to do that? What are the funding sources? What are the other issues that are going to be impacting those changes as they arise? SSI seems to be, in my mind, probably a little more vulnerable in the process. We look at the flow patterns and what's coming across. Access in general, you know, with causeway issues, those kind of things, we're talking about having infrastructure collectively to serve the public and the folks that are still inhabiting the areas who are experiencing the flooding issues. Well, the first thing we've got to do, particularly off the mainland, is get to the St. Simons Island. So the causeway issues and constructing it, just being able to get back and forth to those assets. In addition, on the mainland, as assets get flooded or surrounded by higher waters over time, certainly in short-term events, we can be fairly resilient and recover and restore things at a cost. Building the barriers we might need to protect things in the long term, there's some of that can be done as well. But in some cases, it's not going to be practical to do just because the flooding is going to be so significant, and it's going to be requiring us to invest a lot of money that at this point we're going to be pushed to put those costs back on our customers. I know Jill was mentioning the fact that there are grants and those kind of things for the folks up on Tybee, and that works in very small niches. But I would say that the availability for the kind of magnitude of problems that we'll be experiencing along the coast are going to exceed the kind of grants, and therefore it's going to push a lot of those costs back to the local governments and utilities to take care of it. So again, topography, which impacts flooding areas, and again, we can have all kinds of things going on as the short and long-term impacts of flooding as we reach some kind of a quasi-steady state in overall flooding at some point. Access to inhabited areas, access to water and sewer assets, as I mentioned, just being able to get to the things we have to get to be able to make sure that everything's running and working. Cost considerations we talked about. From our approach, we were just talking about Joint Water and Sewer will map the areas of concern based on flood prediction maps. The work that the DNR and Jennifer and her folks have done map it out pretty well, but we certainly need to understand where those changes are going to be, and as topography impacts where we've got to be able to do things, one of the things we will have to keep in mind is that our infrastructure, being buried infrastructure, stretches across areas that are flooded into areas that are inhabited. Not all of our infrastructure works well flooded all the time. And so there's going to be some long-term impacts there that will be an issue for us. But having the predictive maps will allow us to see where those areas are that we can make impacts, where we can put up the barriers to withstand the flooding and even temporary flooding during storm events or high tide type events. Tentative plans can be made in coordination with the city officials, county officials, and other utilities for serving those areas. So it's going to be I think, as it was pointed out in Jennifer's PowerPoint, the consolidation of efforts. While we may need a champion, we are going to have to be working together as entities in the community to figure out the approach we're going to take to address all these problems. And over time, that's going to be a lot of work, a lot of dedicated people are going to have to spend many hours to make sure that the efforts we make are in coordination. Once impacts begin to inhabited areas or to access, tentative plans will be modified for facts on the ground. Certainly, You know, we can make all the plans we want to, but as things change, the ground truthing facts of what's going on are what's going to drive what we do and where we react to make other changes. The plan will be to continue service for sure and unaffected areas. Certainly we'll be able to maintain service in areas that are not affected for the most part. However, there's no guarantee. As we talked about the fact that as flooding starts to isolate certain areas, we may have infrastructure impacted that actually serves folks that have uninhabited, are inhabiting areas that are basically surrounded by water. So we're going to have to maintain and supply and continue the service to those that we can and make the best of the situation that we do have as we work through things. And again, I stress again, funds and coordination, funds and coordination. With that, just a few quick conclusions that we've come to, talking to the staff a little bit. Once certain core buried backbone assets are impacted, some seemingly unaffected areas may lose service. It's just the way it is, because we basically have sewer collection system lines that once they become flooded and we fill them up with whatever is getting into them, without getting too far down in the weeds, sewer collection lines are meant to only carry sewage. If stormwater or groundwater, which would be very, very prevalent in a flooded situation, and if you've got backbone infrastructure, major trunk lines or collector lines that are buried, you're going to have problems. The other area that you got to remember is we're on wells here. And if we have areas where our wells start to be flooded, building up the barriers that would protect them from whatever incoming waters, that's going to be an issue to just keep them up and functional. Major issue. Temporary barriers may be a possibility to keep some service somewhat longer in affected areas, but it's gonna, if I understand the map of things coming, there'll be a point in time where even the temporary barriers that we put up will be not very functional, and there'll be a point in time where there will be land and property and assets that will just necessarily need to be abandoned, as they won't be serviceable anymore from either roads or from the water and sewer department. I'm thinking that the power folks would also feel like there's some issues with trying to maintain service in some of those areas. So it gets down to cost-benefit analysis must be made to determine where the battle lines are drawn and to mitigate coastal flooding. I'm not sure that we understand all this. Maybe in conjunction with some of the work that Georgia Tech and the DNR are doing, we could go through and model the long-term impacts of where we can do things and where we can't. But only studies like that could provide us with the kind of information to understand the actual magnitude of dollars we're talking about, and then make the cost-benefit analysis of where do we put the money and where do we tell folks it's time to move on and find a better place to live. There's only, so much you can do. Ultimately, some service areas will be lost if the flooding occurs, bottom line. And that's where we look at it. That's my discussion today. It's pretty brief, but that's where we're at as a utility. Hope I didn't put too much of a damper on the
Good morning. I'm Charles Ezel. I'm with Thomas & Hutton. We're an engineering, planning, surveying, and GIS consulting firm based in Savannah, Georgia, with offices here in Brunswick and Atlanta, also in Tennessee and in the Carolinas. I was asked last week if I could help fill in and perhaps lend some insights from a local civil engineer on this topic. When I was asked this, my response to Mason was, well Mason, we are aware of sea level rise, and read about it, and but locally, it's not really been on our radar. From an engineering perspective, we have local ordinances, we have FEMA base flood elevations that all guide our designs for engineering works, whether it be public or private development. So, as I studied over the weekend, okay, as I began to dive into this over the weekend, I contacted our folks in our Charleston office. That team up there has been involved with resiliency and sea level rise discussions for almost 10 years now. So they filled me in on a lot of things that I think that we will all begin discussing in greater detail, especially after learning from the science that we are hearing from the presenters. This is a slide that Jill had also shown, so I'll make it brief. It's Fort Pulaski's tide gauge. It's 85 years of data. There's a linear line that shows the sea is rising. So from engineers, we base our designs, on the historical records of rainfall, storm events, the tide levels, and they dictate our tailwater. So when we do drainage anywhere along the coast, we take the storm water and we pipe it to the tidal marsh. So those tailwaters or tide levels really determine our design. And as you can see, you've got 9 inches over that period, and the studies indicate that it will continue to rise and likely accelerate. When I was on this, I tasked our GIS department, who have done a lot of work up in the Charleston area, to say, hey guys, I need your help down here real quick for a presentation. So what they did was, I asked them just to take the sea level rise data from the NOAA, that NOAA provides, that I believe Jennifer or Jill showed in their presentation, and we take it and aggregate it into our GIS system, which is a web-based system we use internally to, we use internally to analyze data. So I'm not sure why it turned off, but I can see it here. So. Okay. Tell you what, maybe if I stop it and start it, that might help it. There we go. Okay. All right, so I'll back it up real quick. What you see in the blue is current mean higher high water, or the high tide lines, current tidal conditions on your average higher tides. Everything else would be upland in the freshwater wetlands. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but what I'll show is 6 feet of sea level rise in succession, just to give you an idea how the progression works. Within the system, there's topography and everything else that it's doing to show us what to expect. So a foot of sea level rise above mean higher high water, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, and 6 feet. So the graphic shows 6 feet above mean higher high water. Well, later on I'm going to kind of get it briefly into datums, which can be confusing, but they are important to help understand that this is not constant flooding, it's tidal, so that happens over time. The second thing they said they could do quickly, which I was impressed with, was take the GIS tax parcel data for Glynn County and then turn them on and shade them light red, and then show the red areas as the succession of rise. So if a parcel is shaded red, it doesn't mean that it's all being flooded. It means it was touched within the model, but it helps provide an indicator to say, all right, these are the areas that we need to focus on for the future. So this is current conditions. What's highlighted in the light red are parcels that are adjacent to the marsh. As you go through sea level rise, going up the creeks and the canals, additional parcels will be affected. So as you go through the sea level rise, what it does is it just shows that some parcels are affected, and it helps identify those areas. If we had a DTM handy, we could put it over, or a terrain model, and it all goes together when you're visualizing it. So that's just something that we've done, through using GIS. And then to take it to the next level, you can do parcel analysis. You can break it down into the types of parcels, based on the county's zoning data and census data. It can all be put into a format and then exported to help with the planning and the discussions that will occur. So Moving on from GIS, I will focus on something. This is kind of an engineer's thing we enjoy. But what you see is that's a snapshot of the NOAA tide prediction for the St. Simons Island gauge. We're looking at today. The gray area on the left is last night. The white area is daytime today, and then you'll have this evening till midnight in the gray. We have diurnal tides in Georgia, which means 2 high tides and 2 low tides each day. That blue line represents the tide falling and rising. So this morning, 2:30 a.m. around approximately, we had a negative 1.9 tide. If you look at your tide chart, it'd say negative 1.9 feet. And then we had a high tide this morning, a little while ago, that was 7.99 feet. So that came up. That's what you see when you look at your tide charts. Bear in mind that tide charts are based on the mean low water datum, which, to put it simply, is NOAA calculates these for the engineering community and the scientists, that says over a period of, it's usually 19 or 20 years, an epoch, that they'll take the average lowest tide of each day. So they'll take the lowest one. In this case, it was the one last night, and then add them all up and then come up with a mean or an average. So that sets our datum, which is mean low or low water, which is 0, and then all tides are based on it. So some of us are fishermen. We like 6-foot tides, which means the currents will be slow, clear water. Spring tides, we'll look at our chart and say 8.5, 9, oh boy, get ready for some shallow coastal flooding. So for reference, I also wanted to put one thing which I think many of us are aware of is the DNR line. This is the green line that's above where we have this morning's high tide, and I put it on there. It's approximately 9.1 in mean low or low water or tide chart datum. That equates to NAVD 88 of 4.89. So the reason I'm going to switch over from our tide chart numbers to NAVD 88, North American Vertical Datum 88, is because that's what us as engineers and surveyors base our designs on. FEMA, the National Flood Insurance Program, does their mapping all in that 88 datum, which we've been fortunate to get updated maps recently for Glynn County. This is from the same website that NOAA has for the St. Simons gauge. Really, I'll go quickly here. Some examples are, if we had a 7.2 high tide on the tide chart, that would be elevation 3 on the 88 datum. So if you think about it, many of our houses have an AE 12 or an AE 13. You may think that's a lot of freeboard or space between your floor elevation and what the tide is. But as we get sea level rise, we're going to be seeing tide predictions starting at 9 and getting higher. 10s and 11s may become commonplace in the future based on the studies. So switching it over real quick, I believe Jill and Jennifer touched on this, but these photographs here are the Tybee Island Causeway. It's their only point of access on and off, just like the tourist causeway we have in St. Simons. But the photographs here aren't from tropical events. They're from king tide or the coastal flooding events that typically occur in November, October. The most recent one was on the left. We've got a family that lives on Tybee, and sometimes they have to leave 2 hours before you would to get to work and deliver their children to school in our Savannah office. So you're looking at those pictures, you might have a foot of water over the whole causeway that lasted for a few hours. So when you look at elevations of the Tybee Island Causeway, Highway 80, it averages around 6 to 7 feet in that engineering datum, the 88. So when we shift gears, focus here in our community, this is the intersection of Torres Causeway and Highway 17. The Torres Causeway is a little bit higher in elevation, which is a positive. So, we're not seeing this regular overtopping of the causeway, with our causeway being 7s, 8s, and 9s typically, at the lowest points. But you have down here on the lower area, that's the Winn-Dixie Shopping Center. Then Highway 17 is up and down, and to the right is Taurus. When you look at the Winn-Dixie parking lot, you'll see 6s. So that translates to an area that is susceptible and will continue to be to coastal flooding that we'll see during these high tide cycles. This is the same 3 feet on top of high tide, or the mean high or high water. That shows the blue areas where the water will back up. And for instance, it will utilize storm drain pipes to go under highways, through culverts, to come up and meet its elevations. So that's a planning tool that helps engineers work with the community to understand where our target areas will be as those assessments are performed moving forward. I'll put this in here. I'm not going to get into the details, but drainage engineering can be pretty confusing. And the City of Charleston did a great job with a presentation that's posted on their website that really explains draining a city that's low and flat, which is very similar to St. Simon's Island, City of Brunswick, and what we have here. So I encourage anyone to check that out if you're interested in the engineering side of things. This is just a quick snapshot from it. The issue is we have a great inlet and a parking lot or a road. The water goes into a structure, it goes to a pipe, and then it goes to the tide. To keep it simple, at low tide, the water can flow out easily. The bottom graphic is high tide, where we have head pressure differences, and the water just won't move, or it'll move very slowly. So those are the challenges, and their nature. We can't mitigate them. The only thing we can do is do things that, from an engineering perspective, to put tide gates on, which were shown in the other exhibits, to help limit the water backing up. But getting our storm drainage off will be a challenge in the future. The red dashed line is a larger pipe, but at high tide, the larger pipe with the back pressure doesn't do anything. When it does drain out, it will go quicker. This is an example of a tidal backflow preventer that was installed in St. Mary's this fall. It's one of many that they have planned as part of their resiliency effort to help their old downtown area prepare for the future, where they have pipes and ditches that drain straight to the St. Mary's River. I put this in here just as Mason and I were talking. Charleston's been very involved, along with the efforts of Georgia here with Tybee and St. Mary's and the upcoming communities. That's a strategy that might be of use and value for folks to look at. It was developed by the City of Charleston and their departments internally, and then in conjunction with assistance from other agencies. Quick excerpt from it is reinvest. That's really the key aspect of resilience is planning. Identify the projects, prioritize them. Some you won't be able to do because you cannot afford them. And really the takeaway, I think, from it all is it's incremental in nature. We can't engineer a solution all at once, even if we were certain that we were going to hit the 4 feet at 2100, because we wouldn't be able to afford it. So the big takeaway, I think, is incremental planning. And of course, the studies will be updated on an ongoing basis, which will help the engineering decisions get made from a near term, whether it's a development, or for critical facilities, which and road design, which is a very long range prospect. This was the Charleston Resilience Network. It's a community. It's basically a voluntary network of organizations within the city that's been in effect. I believe for 8 or 10 years. They were explaining to me. But it's pretty neat because it brings in many of the partners to the tables. They meet on a monthly or bi-monthly basis. And you have your business, your local government, your federal agencies, and then not listed are many what they call connecting partners, which are engineers, architects, banks, our environmental advocates, everybody that's a stakeholder and wants to be at the table. So that's just something that was there. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you.
So where are we going here to get that?
Go ahead and put it on, and then you can turn it on.
Okay.
This is yours, right?
Yeah.
Just making sure.
Check 1, 2. You got that? Yep. All right. So, I get the joy of anchoring this program. And the question I have is, how many people looked at the agenda today and said, what is a banker doing on this program? It makes no sense to me. All right, there's your honest. All of you are. In fact, when I looked at it, I immediately had a joke pop into my head because it looked like to me there's 3 scientists and 2 engineers, which sounds like a great opening to 3 scientists, 2 engineers, and a banker walk into a bar. But I do think that there is an argument to be made that one of the challenges our community is going to face as we see this water go up is going to be access to capital. Now, for me to get to the place where I show you I think that there's going to be a challenge of getting capital, we're going to have to talk a little bit about history, and we're going to have to talk a little bit about politics. Now, when I say that we're going to talk about politics, one of Paul's instructions to us was, all right, this is an informational session. We are not here to start a fiery political debate on what's causing sea level rise or climate change or whatever you want to refer it to as. I would ask that same courtesy because I'm going to talk about some political things, but try my best to not express an opinion on whether they are the right thing or the wrong thing for our community. They just are what they are. So the second thing is where I think we'll be affected, I don't really think is guesswork because I think we've already seen it. So if you'll grant me those courtesies, I'm assuming this means this way. Okay, first thing I need to tell you is a dirty little secret in banking that you may not know. And that is banks are regulated and driven, everything we do, by an insurance company. I know you've seen the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. You've seen it on every ad. You hear it in every radio spot, member FDIC. Well, what does that mean? The FDIC supplies deposit insurance so that you feel good about putting your money in a bank, that you know that if something were to go wrong, you're going to get it back. But what they do is they come in and they examine us very thoroughly to make sure that we are being good stewards of your money, and they rate us on something called safety and soundness. So, safety and soundness is made up of several different items. Let me get to my notes because I've been known to just ramble. So let's talk about that for a minute. First thing is credit quality. That's a given. That's, do you have the wherewithal to pay this loan back? We won't be talking about that. But what we will be talking about is compliance. And this is where they hammer us every day. Is the bank following the letter of the law? Are we crossing every T? Are we dotting every I? And the next thing is, are we properly mitigating our risk? So we're going to take your money and we're going to loan it out, but we want to make sure that we're giving it to somebody who can pay it back, and we also want to make sure that we do everything we can that if the guy can't pay it back, that we are going to find a way to get your money back. So how do we do that? We do several things. We get an appraisal on the property you want to use as collateral. But the one we're going to talk about most today is flood insurance, because that's where our community might be at risk. All right, let's do just a little bit of political history. Some regulatory drivers. National Flood Insurance Act of 1968. Prior to 1968, what the federal government would do is they would swoop into a community and provide aid if there was disaster. It wasn't it was not an insurance program at that point, it was just aid. But in the late 20s, there was big floods in Texas that just drained that money. And then we go into the Depression, so of course there's no money there, and it's not until the 50s before the Truman administration starts talking again about this idea of community and national flood insurance programs. Flash up to 1966 before we actually get the Johnson administration to come up with a paper called the Unified National Program for Managing Flood Losses. They submitted that to Congress. It was debated. It was batted around until 1968 when we get the National Flood Insurance Act. Now, one of the interesting things from that paper was this notion. A national flood program could help families bear the risk of floods, and this is my favorite part, keep this in mind as we talk about Glynn County, discourage unwise occupancy of flood-prone areas. Yeah, I know. So anyway, out of the Flood Insurance Act of 1968, we get the National Flood Insurance Program, which we still have in place today. Now, the key to any key to any insurance program working is having a big enough pool of people in that program, right? You got to mitigate your risk by spreading it out all over the place. So this was the big challenge with the National Flood Program, is how do we encourage participation? Well, we encourage participation by grandfathering in houses that we know are probably already in places they shouldn't be or are built too low, or, I hate to say this, offering discounts to communities. We do everything we can to keep those rates as low as possible to make as many people want to join in and as many communities as possible join into the program. That was the strategy. That sort of still is the strategy. But after 1968, Hurricane Camille comes, In 1972, Hurricane Agnes comes, and we discover not as many people are participating in the program as we thought, so we don't have a big enough pool. It's not working correctly. We have to get more people into the pool. So, the Flood Disaster Protection Act of 1973. This was designed to figure out a way to put more people in that flood pool, to mitigate their risk better, to position ourselves to be able to handle the next disaster. So how do they do it? They put it on the backs of bankers. See here in red where it says, require the purchase of flood insurance by property owners who are being assisted by federal programs or by federally supervised, regulated, or insured agencies or institutions. That's banks. Federal agency is the Federal Mortgage, National Mortgage Association, Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, and it has to go on any form of loan. Home loan, business loan, doesn't matter. If you're going to secure it with a property in a flood zone, you have to have flood insurance. No ifs, ands, or buts, right? Problem solved. Well, not quite. So in 1993, you may remember there was a huge flood along the Mississippi and the Missouri. It was a big deal. It was on the news for weeks. Well, when they went in to look at all these properties that were in the flood zone, they discovered that 20% of the people had flood insurance. What happened? Everybody's supposed to have flood insurance, right? No. They were supposed to, but nobody was keeping an eye on it. Nobody could tell. So in comes the National Flood Insurance Reform Act of 1994. This is the one I like to call Let's Make Bankers Do Our Dirty Work Act of 1994. Yes, it's required for a flood, but if you don't get it, it's the banker's fault. And to show you how seriously we are, we're going to institute a new thing called civil money penalties, where a bank can be fined up to $2,000 per instance of any loan that it has that does not have adequate or have flood insurance at all. And this is a big deal, and it scares us to death. And we spend more time and more money making sure that we document and that we do everything to the letter of the law. And it is not easy to do. It's very difficult to do. Even with your best, when you have the best intentions, you can still mess up. When I said crossing T's and dotting I's, I was not kidding. A local bank here in Glynn County was fined $135,000 in 2013 for flood violations. Just last year, SunTrust, the biggest bank in the state of Georgia, was fined $1.5 million for flood insurance. Now, it doesn't mean that they're, SunTrust is made up of a bunch of scofflaws that's just saying, be damned with your regulations, we're not getting flood insurance. It just means there may have been inadequate flood insurance. Maybe they didn't have the form signed at the right time. Maybe they didn't send out the notice. Who here has ever received a notice from a bank that really made you angry when you opened it up because it said, hey, your flood insurance is going to expire in 45 days and we're going to force place it on you if you don't get it right now? Yeah? A lot of you have. That's this. That is the National Flood Insurance Reform Act of 1994. $2,000 per file if we don't send the letter out. In the letter, they dictate how that is. It's very nasty and it's very scary when you get it because it really does make you think you've done something wrong. And all it really should say is, hey, friendly neighbor, your flood insurance is going to expire in 45 days. Make sure you call your insurance agent. If you don't, we'll help you out, but that's not the way it's worded. The way it's worded is we're going to put you in jail. So, Flood Insurance Act of 1994, that starts building the base, starts expanding, mitigating the risk, getting more people into it. So now where is our risk? We've got this great flood insurance program, right? You remember when I told you how we kept rates artificially low to get people in there, and we grandfathered folks in there, and we offered discounts to make sure communities all participated? Well, Hurricane Katrina came through in 2005, followed shortly thereafter by Hurricane Sandy. And we found out that FEMA didn't have enough money because the National Flood Insurance Program wasn't bringing in the money that we need to have. So, what happened here locally? Biggert Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2012. I intentionally made that fade in real slow because it's so ominous. I wish I had music to go along with that. Bang, bang, Does anybody here live on Old Riverside or live on Riverside Drive beside Woody? Okay, you know where this is going. Biggert Waters Act said we need to get rid of grandfathering. We need to get rid of any of these discounts. We need to go back to straight risk-based pricing. So we're going to look at historical data. We're going to look at where your house is. We can see how close it is to the ground, where you are in a flood zone. And we are going to risk-based price your insurance policy. Some folks on Riverside saw their insurance policies go from the $2,500 to $3,000 a year range to the $25,000 a year range. $25,000 a year. Now, if you own a house that's worth $350,000, are you going to pay $25,000 a year from here till you pay off your loan on a $350,000 house? You have to love that house a lot to want to do that. But the problem is you're going to say, all right, we got to move. Who are you going to sell it to? Nobody's going to buy that house from you when it's saddled with that kind of insurance problem. So you got a big loan, you got a big insurance burden, you got a house that's just started being devalued because of where it sits. What are you going to do? You're going to walk away from it. And who's going to get it? I'm going to get it. I'm getting the bank. The bank's going to get the house. It's a very real problem. It actually happened. So maybe you remember this. Rising flood insurance rates could sink homes. Insurance for floods. Brunswick News is all over it. By the way, Buff, is this legal for me to screen cap your website? Because if it isn't, how about I do this? Everybody go out and buy Through the Lens by Bobby Haven, the 2019 Brunswick News calendar. Well, free advertising just for fair use of your product. No, we were all over it. We knew it. The chamber was all over it. The EDA, everybody saw that this is a pending crisis. So here's where my assertion is one of our biggest risks with rising flood, is we are so dependent upon the National Flood Program that small changes to it could devalue a lot of our property and make some of our neighborhoods that we love be just, they're no longer a viable neighborhood for us. What happened after Biggert Waters? There was a scramble for the Homeowner Flood Insurance Affordability Act of 2014. Have you ever used the joke, it takes an act of Congress to get something done? It literally took an act of Congress to get the insurance rates on Riverside Drive back down to something that the homeowners there could afford. Will we always be able to do that? I don't know. But it's a pretty delicate balance that you're hinging the value of your property, the value of your business on. But here's what I do know. If you can't get insurance, I can't lend you any money. I cannot provide capital to you to develop land, to build properties, to invest in your business as long as you want to use that property. I just can't. So you dry up the supply of capital to a community, and all of a sudden you dry up growth. And anybody will tell you in government that if you're not growing, you're dying. So that is Biggert Waters and the Affordability Act of 2014. That, I think, is our biggest challenge when it comes to banks and businesses. But there are a couple of others. So I'm going to breeze through a couple of these things really quickly that you may or may not remember. 2014, does anybody remember us losing a big solar farm because of wetlands classification? That's where I was first introduced to Charles Ezell. Charles and Thomas and Hutton and those guys came down and helped because it was a big deal for the EDA and it was a big deal for the chamber. Now, this one was a little bit different because this was an interpretation issue on the way we were classifying wetlands. And we saw some very scary maps come across the desk of the chamber and the EDA that showed that there was no more developable property in the Golden Isles based on these new classifications. And we about had a heart attack, didn't we? But Woody led a charge, and we teamed up with Savannah EDA. We teamed up with some folks in South Carolina to go visit with all of our elected officials to talk about how can we mitigate this, and we were able to kind of make some strides, and it's not as tough now. But what I contend is that was an interpretation of code issue based on some things, some indicators, and Charles has a beautiful presentation based on that. And what we were fighting was the fact that these properties were high and dry. They were not wet. But they contained some new indicators that had been added into a new insert into the code, and so the interpretation was that they were wet. However, what if they're wet? What if it's not a fact of whether or not a loblolly pine plantation indicates wetlands, but the fact that it's wet when you walk out there on your boots and you go squish? Because some of these properties are going to go squish when you walk through them. and they're going to come out of our inventory. The next thing is retraction of coastal wealth is also a potential issue when it comes to doing business in our area. $1 trillion of our nation's wealth is tied up in coastal real estate. Coastal real estate has always been an appreciating asset. Will it always be an appreciating asset? I don't know. But I showed you earlier about safety and soundness was credit quality and compliance. Part of credit quality is your net worth, is do you have the ability to do business with me? And if that part of your balance sheet is shrinking, then that question may change. I'm going to leave you with one last thing to look up because it's very interesting, and you wonder if it'll make it this way. Back in May of this year, there was a Harvard study that coined a new term called climate gentrification. And they've done a big study around Miami-Dade County, and they can show through empirical evidence that properties that are in hazard areas are not appreciating or not appreciating at the rate that other areas are, and the high and dry properties are appreciating at an accelerated rate. So it changes the dynamic. That property that has always been the most valuable property to us may not always be the most desirable. And now we are looking for something different. We're changing the behaviors of the land consumer on the coast. And it's happening right now in Miami. There's no reason why it can't happen here. So, with that being said, I'm announcing today that about 30 miles off of the coast, there's a ridge called Trail Ridge. It's where the coastal plain takes a natural up, and I'm offering loan specials, member FDIC, on Trail Ridge for you right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mason. Thank you, Mason. I'm Scott McQuaid, and I am the CEO of the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and I'll be leading our Q&A session. So at this time, if I could just ask all our presenters to come back up, and if we could give them another round of applause, folks. So what we'll do next is go through a Q&A, and Tate Holbrook has been kind enough to bring me a series of questions on your cards. And what we'll do is try to get through as many of them as we can. We're going to take about 20 minutes or so to ask our presenters these various questions. And with that, I'm going to power up our wireless mics and pass them down the road. Testing. That works. All right. And I'm going to put one Mason down here with you. I do remember those are live. All right. So what we're going to do with this Q&A session is I'm just going to open it up to our floor and allow you to answer the question. There's a variety of different questions that we have, everything from technical questions that are probably more engineering focused. We have several that are planning questions, and Mason, I'm sorry, I don't have any banking questions yet, but we might get some. But again, if anyone feels particularly inclined, just pass the mic over and we'll get started. Our first question today is, what, if any, effect will rising sea levels have on aquaculture industry, particularly oysters, farming, shrimp, fishing, and the like?
Wow. Well, aquaculture is a thriving industry that we're really investing in here in Georgia. We have a new UGA hatchery on Skidaway Island. And oysters they have great potential in that they improve water quality, they're sustainable, and they can migrate with the sea level rise. So I think it depends on the rates of sea level rise as far as the impact on aquaculture. You know, if the marsh can keep up with the rates and what sort of barriers the marsh might be meeting as far as roads or infrastructure, buildings, if we still have that habitat available for them. But I encourage you to speak with Mark Reese, the director of our organization, UGA Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant. He is has much more expertise than I do on that topic.
I would just add that one thing, not necessarily sea level rise, but I think that our aquaculture is susceptible to a lot of the impacts from climate change, like ocean acidification. And we don't necessarily have a lot of information on that for coastal Georgia, and I think that that's a huge gap that we would like to see more information and research done on. As well as the shrimping industry. I think that the ocean acidification issues would also impact the shrimping industry as well.
Yeah, I think just layering up on what Jennifer said, speaking to some of the developments we'd like to do with the sensor technologies is to develop long-term time series of things like ocean pH with the sensor technologies, as well as ocean temperature, salinity, all of which would be useful in keeping track of the complexity of these trends through time.
Great, thank you. So this is a twofold question. Is raising the level of the causeway important to lowering Glenn County flood insurance rates, i.e. what else can be done in Glenn County to reduce the flood insurance rates and risk?
So for CRS, the community rating system, there is a huge manual, and it lists a ton of different things that can be done to increase the discounts that Glenn County and Brunswick and Jekyll Island are receiving. And this is particularly important, to piggyback on what Mason said, in that these rates are going to be rising. Congress has already, passed 2 acts in recent years. And so the more we can do on a local level to try to get out ahead of that, might help to buffer some of this, some of the impacts that Mason mentioned.
Yeah, I would just say there is, like Jill mentioned, a lot of communities even hire an entire staff just to focus on CRS. It is a lot of work. But there are adoption of ordinances, floodplain ordinances that are more stringent. There is, in this latest update to the CRS, there is also a long line of sea level rise steps that you can take. And then, it's, just depends on what the community has already done versus what there is still left to do. And I think that the city and the county still have a few of those options that are still left.
I could add one more thing too, just about the causeway. For instance, in Tybee, that's Highway 80, it's a state route. There is a plan that DOT has to raise it a small amount under their next construction project, which I believe is supposed to start this year, along with bridge replacement for the 50-year-old bridges. So that's an incremental type thing to address the coastal flooding they are already seeing. So with our causeway being somewhat higher, just knowing that is something that may occur in the future is something to plan for.
Great, thank you. These questions follow a similar line of thought. And this one asks, why do the most recent flood maps or FEMA maps lower the coastal risk and flood risk for Glenn County when it is apparent that flood levels are rising?
I'm so sorry. So the firm maps, the flood insurance rate maps, they're based on historic factors, and so the most recent versions pulled from storms. We had some really big storms at the end of the 1800s, as I'm sure you all know, and those were sort of lopped off in the time period that they looked at. They also didn't include the most recent storms like Matthew and Irma, and so that's part of the reason why.
Yeah, I would say too that they do not incorporate sea level rise. That they're based on your elevation, and so that's a huge component that's not kept in.
Okay, thank you. All right, next question is, what are the implications of projected sea level rise on our current industries, those that handle particular wastes or hazardous materials in Glynn County?
Just off the top of my head, I don't know that they have ever been looked at. Like, I don't know that the sea level rise projections overlaid with, say, any of the Superfund sites. I don't know that that has ever been compared thus far. It definitely would be, you know, an interesting overlay. I'm sure that there would be issues with that.
Okay, seeing that microphone go down, I'll go on to our next question. This one is a question specifically for Mason Waters. Considering 25% of all home and floods are not in the NFIP, and I'm not sure what NFIP means, but maybe Mason does, how do we handle the flood loss liability on these mortgages?
That one's tough because has anybody here ever made a flood claim on their home? It is not easy to do when you are in a properly documented area and you have all of your ducks in a row. Particularly in our area, because they make a big difference between storm surge and flood. It's almost as if the NFIP was written to be specifically for those living on the banks of a river where the water may rise gently and go out again. So there is probably some disconnect on where the true hazards are and what the true hazards are, and some communities are probably not properly covered. I think just some personal anecdotal stuff. I saw during Matthew and saw during Irma some claims that were processed pretty efficiently, but I don't think that's the case for everyone. I think it can be very tough to make those claims, and it's going to get harder as we see the hazards go up and they remove the grandfathering and they put some more restrictions on where you can build and what you can build and how much it's going to cost you to do that.
Okay, thank you. Oh, we having someone else? Yeah.
I was just going to add, maybe I shouldn't, but I know that out of the University or Florida's Sea Grant program, they've done a lot of legal research on the matter, and there have been, in those instances where homes were allowed to be zoned for, you know, residential development that were impacted, that were not required to have flood insurance, but were allowed to build there, where the local government is then in turn being sued for allowing them to actually build there. And so it is a liability that they are seeing in Florida back on the municipalities or the local governments.
Okay, great, thank you. You should see my index cards spread all over this podium. Many new questions have come in and I'm sorting through them, but there seems to be a theme of asking about what can residents do if they own a home that is in the floodplain or on slab on grade. Does any panelist have recommendations for things that homeowners can do that might be in the danger zone, so to speak?
So a few recommendations from FEMA are, well, one, to elevate if you can, and there's funding to do that. That's how Tybee, they've applied for FEMA hazard mitigation funding to elevate their homes. You can install tide openings in your home to allow the water to flow through. You can relocate your home on your property. Let's see. There's not, you know, it is a problem that there's not really low-hanging fruit. There's not easy things that we can do as individuals. It really takes a lot of community level work. But you, Mason, you may have ideas, things you've seen.
Well, I was just going to say the thing I look to is the modeling that's been done on all the flooding and the rate at which it's going to be coming in. If I were owning a property that I thought was going to be imminently in danger, I'd probably see what I could do to track down where the flooding's going to occur and how fast it's predicted to see if I really needed to worry about it. If it's going to be real soon, you know, of course, for a lot of us, it may be pretty far out there, so it may not be imminent danger. It's not like, you know, we need to be, in every case, jumping out there and spending big bucks to make some changes tomorrow. As I was talking to Jennifer during the discussions, the last presentation, the thing that I saw was that the 100-year analysis, a lot can happen in 100 years. Now, granted, things may speed up and happen a lot faster, but we're talking about a really big time window here to get worked into. So I don't know if anybody's taking away, going home with the impression that, you know, we need to be out there and propping up buildings and that kind of thing tomorrow. It's a little bit longer term in my mind than what we're talking about.
I will add this one thing is, just because your contractor says, don't worry, after inspection, we'll cover these flood vents up and you can have a nice bonus room down here, does not mean that's a good idea. Because we see it every day. I'm not going to point any fingers, but I'm sure somebody here has something that's below flood grade. I may have electrical outlets in my garage. You're not supposed to have any of that. So don't, just follow the code. That's one of the best things you can do. Don't do it. Keep the flood vents in place.
And actually, I thought of a few more. You can elevate your utilities on your house. You can backfill the crawl spaces. And these are all things that will reduce your flood insurance rate. But there's a lot of other things like building a rain garden in the landscaping that you're using that can help. They may not necessarily translate into dollars, but they could and will definitely help mitigate the flooding on your property.
Great, thank you. The next question comes from a series of, again, questions all asking something similar. So to highlight those questions, I'm being asked if we currently in Glynn County have any of the water monitoring sensors. I guess those are the water height sensors. If not, what plans are in place to add them in the future? And then additionally, do we have any sensors in Glynn County that measure stormwater and those increases? So I think the question is twofold. One, the system that was described today, yes, the box.
So we have one. It's right here. This is actually production model number 11. We have 30 more in production now. Specifically for the project, so there are a lot of different types of sensors, and NOAA and USGS and other folks working in this space, but I can answer specifically for the project that Kim and I are working on. We do not currently have the active effort to deploy here, but that's part of why we're here today, in fact, is to explore that and look for ways to make that happen. And we think it's very feasible to do that in the near term.
And I would add that I didn't speak to the low cost of this device, but the box that Russ is holding is about $250 to $300 worth of parts, pretty much off the shelf, that his team of experts designed specifically for this purpose. And the internet hubs that these sensors talk to are also relatively inexpensive, maybe $1,500 a piece, and you don't need. They talk for many miles radius. So this infrastructure is not hard. The issue is just how do we, move from a pilot that's based in Chatham County out into what scale of what pilots to serve other communities, and how can we do that in a way that we, do it well, right, and have the time and bandwidth to serve the community, not just throw a sensor down and say good luck with that, but to support its use and integration in the planning process.
Great, thank you. This one looks like it is geared towards Jimmy at Joint Water Sewer. Are the causes of the boil water advisories somehow related to flooding issues or sea level rise?
No.
All right. That was too quick, Jimmy. I wasn't ready for to get right back to it. So Let's see. This one looks like it's geared for Charles. What, if any, level of SLR is incorporated into your engineering or your firms or others to plan for infrastructure in Glynn County's future, considering today's presentation?
Well, currently, we design through historical record and tailwaters, based on past events. We are also governed by local ordinance for stormwater design, and that's how we have been doing it up till now. I would certainly think, as this discussion and dialogue moves forward through the years, that will become something that the local communities will then incorporate in their regulations and ordinances that we will then have guidance to design from. I can't recall exactly the specifics I read, but for instance, City of Charleston is doing a 50-year long look, and some of their designs are taking into account a certain level of sea level rise. I believe it's 1.5 to 2.5 feet, but those changes we anticipate coming, and we look forward to learning more.
I just wanted to mention we're currently funding a project for the city of Savannah and Chatham County, and they're overlaying using the same tool that we used for joint water and sewers plan to look at stormwater infrastructure and sea level rise. And so it's very similar, looking at the infrastructure and the facilities and overlaying that with a very similar rate to what Charleston is using. So I think that can be something that could be mimicked for this area.
I was just going to add that part of the example of the co-development strategy here is listening to stakeholders. In our first public workshop we had back in September, we heard about the importance of these stormwater channels and the grid of drainage that is critical to prevent this flooding. And so the same kind of technology that we use to sense the sea level height, of course, could be used to sense the channel heights or intersection heights. And so that becomes a system that you can monitor cohesively in real time. So that's an extension that we learn from the community, and we're going to be working for in this first year.
Great, thank you. I'm going to combine several of these questions because they're all of a similar vein here. It's being asked, should county and state local governments limit the amount of coastal development, such as condos and the such, that are close proximity to these flood zones? What are other areas doing to incorporate this presentation into their planning documents so that we plan for the future versus building in these sensitive areas? There's another hot potato on the
It really is, because this is one of the things that I alluded to when I said I'm not going to express an opinion on whether some of these regulations are correct, because I know that there are a lot of people probably in this audience that think, no, we should completely cut off any kind of development on anything that's in a fragile ecosystem or in a potentially hazardous area, and there is some argument to be made for that. But then there is also an argument to be made for free use of land, and if you own a piece of property, what should you be able to do with it? So there's a very contentious argument on either side. I think what you most have to do is make sure that you can provide emergency services to someone that might be in this area, and then it becomes a question of those insurance rates. Should they pay an exorbitant amount of insurance and be allowed to be in that because they're assuming a risk that all of us have to bear, or should they be grandfathered in? There's a lot of questions, and that is a hot button topic based on, can you regulate somebody's use of their land, or should they have free use of their land?
I was just going to say that, think about it from the business standpoint. If you know that the property you've got is at risk, you got to remember, you got to market that stuff. And if you know it's a problem property, the folks that are going to be buying the pieces that you develop on that are going to be thinking it's probably knowing it too. So it's the kind of thing I think the market would almost drive you to the right decision anyway, provided the right facts are out there.
Great, thank you. Jimmy, this one looks like it might be coming back to you. I've had several questions asking about what individual citizens can do to monitor and protect their household water quality. And in turn, I also have another question. How is JWSC preparing for potential infiltration into our water system?
Okay, that covers a lot of things. See, as far as us preventing infiltration, that kind of thing, certainly we talk about it a lot at the Joint Water and Sewer. The fact is that a lot of our collection system is open gravity systems that allows for groundwater and rainwater to get in where there's defects in our lines and access for those kinds of waters to get in. If we're in a flooded area, if we get to a point where some of these gravity type assets become flooded on a regular basis, well, that's going to eat up some capacity. That's going to have an issue with us. One of the things that we're doing right now from a planning standpoint, we've taken on a new, as we call it, I&I initiative. That is to analyze where we've got the worst problems with groundwater infiltration and rainwater inflow into our gravity lines. It's a long-term process that should, in the next 2 years, provide us with the tools, an assessment report of our lines over on the island and here on the mainland to tell us where we need to be investing money to seal those lines up. There's limits to how much you can get done, though, and the full course of what we'd have to do. If you were getting routine, repeated flooding, you'd be in a situation that would probably be untenable for those lines. And probably service would either have to change to a different technology, being at a pressurized sewer systems. Some of you may be familiar with the fact that grinder pump systems are available for a lot of neighborhoods where gravity doesn't seem to work because there's just not enough elevation change in the neighborhood. But certainly that's an approach that could be taken in those neighborhoods in those areas, provided you're not talking about major backbone infrastructure, which would impact large areas. What was the front end of that question?
What can residents do to protect their home water quality? And are there things that they can do to monitor it?
Okay. As far as water quality goes, the lines we've got are the water lines that provide water to our customers are pressurized lines. That means water from the outside's not coming in. If anything, if there's a defect in a water line, you're going to get water weeping out or pushing out. So you won't have a water quality issue there. If you're concerned about your water, I'm not sure what you would be concerned about. There are any number of test kits and things that you can use to check your water if you're concerned about it. But I don't see that being a problem as much as sanitary sewer concerns and the gravity systems that we've currently got in service.
Right. Okay. Rising sea level projections that track well ahead of this generation onto the next. What are some recommendations that the public can use to educate future generations, and how can the public assist in this endeavor?
Yeah, so that's why, well, at a small scale, why we're excited to be partnering with Sea Grant and some other folks across the coastal communities here to try to build up a curriculum for the school children, especially in middle to high school, where they're learning some of this content like earth science and engineering, ocean science, or environmental science already. But unfortunately, at the Georgia state level, our textbooks are just way behind, right, in terms of delivering them the information that they're going to need to serve their communities and participate fully and protecting them. So I think that's critical. This is going to be something combined with a grassroots development of resources that are really next generation, and then as well as making sure, and this here you can help with, making sure that our textbooks and our state level curriculum is up to speed with the latest science to serve this generation. Because right now we're delivering them science from about 10, 15, 20 years ago, even in some cases. And as a climate scientist, this is one of my long-term goals.
So there's a program at Yale called the Climate Communications Program, and for the last 10 years, they've been tracking Americans' opinions on these issues. And one of the things that we all agree on is that we need to do a better job of educating our students, our children. And so that is a good starting point in just thinking about what we can do here in Glynn County to reach our students and start helping them be educated on their risk so that when they are future consumers and buying a home, that they understand some of the risks that they might face.
Great,
Yeah,
thank you.
Let me
Oh, you can go
just,
ahead.
one of the things that actually has been most exciting to me about this project with deploying sensors is that educational component and engaging the students in the schools. And here in Glynn County, along the entire Georgia coast, these are real stories. We don't have to just look at textbooks and videos to talk about this. These are the kinds of things, everybody has participated in the evacuation of some kind in the last several years. And so when we have the students working to build the sensors and then say, we're gonna put your high school sticker on there, and we're gonna, you're gonna participate, and when your family drives by that bridge and recognizes, hey, we're participating in this, that's part of the involvement, that's part of the engagement, so that everybody thinks about it, as part of their daily lives and not just as an academic exercise.
One more thing, which is brand new, and Jill and myself, and I think Jennifer as well, is involved with a program called the Georgia Climate Project, which launched just within the last several months. It's a partnership that's the cement of which is really UGA, Georgia Tech, and Emory, as some of the key institutions that have programs themselves in the area of climate change, but also seeks to involve the entire academic landscape across the state, as well as community practitioners and stakeholders in conversations around these very issues that you're discussing today. So I think that's an exciting development. You can go to the website, georgiaclimateproject.org, and check it out. And I know that that will be a growing force for awareness building, communication, and resources for the state, and I'm really honored to be a part of it.
Great. Well, thank you. And that will conclude our Q&A session. Thank you, Tate, for your help, and thank you all that provided questions to our presenters.
Thank you, Scott. Please join me one more time in showing our appreciation for our panelists. Excellent presentations. Very, very helpful. Just a few thoughts before I let you go. When we started to plan this event, believe it or not, 6 weeks ago, we decided that a fully successful event would have attracted 100, 150 people. Though we did not underestimate the importance of this discussion, we clearly underestimated the interest that exists in Glynn County to learn more about sea level predictions and how they will affect the coast of Georgia. Thank you for your interest today and for your future participation in what we believe will be an ongoing community discussion about how we will prepare for this trend. As you can see, there's been plenty of research that's been done. Now is the time to start a meaningful planning process about using that information and putting into place the mechanisms that will protect the coast of Georgia and our community. As Coastal Georgia's largest grant maker, and with its focus on maximizing the impact of our fund holders' philanthropy in solving problems, the Coastal Georgia Foundation should be considered a valuable resource and partner as this community moves forward in our efforts to address this and other issues that potentially will erode the quality of life that exists on the coast of Georgia. We, as an organization, will continue our research on effective responses undertaken by other coastal communities that face these rising sea levels, and we'll share that information with you and the rest of this community on an ongoing basis. Again, please consider us a resource for these and other efforts. We are prepared to do what is necessary to ensure that this discussion, this critical discussion, continues, and that preparations and adaptations are considered and made in advance of the rising sea levels that will be faced by the coastal Georgians in the future. So let's get to work. Thank you for your time and attention this morning, and I look forward to working with all of you all in the future.